Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. This week, I'm in Austin, Texas, and today I'm with Eric Gates, who's the minister at Central Christian Church here in Austin. Prior to coming to Central Christian, Eric was a member of the U.S. Marine Corps and was a police officer here in Austin. Eric, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Angela.
It's so great to meet you in person. I first met you about a year ago, and I've been staying with you and your wife, Katie, here in Austin the last week. I really appreciate it. But we had some conversations that made me really want to sit down and talk with you more. I know I mentioned it in the introduction that you were in the U.S. Marine Corps before. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how you started and what brought you to where you are today?
Definitely. So in 1991, at age 16, I joined the U.S. Marine Corps, and I went into the Marines as an infantryman. After serving as an infantryman for about a year, I became a reconnaissance Marine. I went through the various training and schools to do that. And during my time as a Marine, I transitioned into college. I got my degree from Texas A&M in military history. And upon graduating college, I joined the Austin Police Department in 1998, where I served as an Austin police officer for approximately 9 years. And during all of that time, serving with the 4th Marine Division, 4th Reconnaissance Battalion, and at the Austin Police Department, serving as a patrol officer on the street for 7 years and undercover in a career criminal unit chasing wanted fugitives with the marshals, I began to understand that there was a lot of trauma that I had experienced. I lost several friends, one of them a close friend at the police department. They were killed in the line of duty. And it really took me to a dark place in my life. And in working with the police psychologist, I came to learn that I actually had post-traumatic stress. And I also came to realize that I had suffered traumatic brain injury from some of the things I experienced in the Marine Corps and as a police officer. And so in going through my own journey, going into dark places, I had to reach out for help. And in reaching out for help, I realized that I could still be of service to my community. And that's what found me going into ministry here in Austin, Texas, and becoming the minister at Central Christian Church. It's been this drive, this desire for me to be of service to others and to help others when they're either down and out, or when they're being taken advantage of by systems or by environments that they have no control over.
Wow, that's amazing. So I'm sure it's incredibly helpful for the members of your church and those in the community that you work with, that you come to them with so much experience and real world, like you're very relatable in that way. I'm sure that's very helpful. Well, I know through your work, you've worked with a number of veterans who've left the military and have worked to transition back into the civilian world, looking for a new job, looking to just kind of adjust to life again. What are some of the challenges that you've seen that veterans are really facing during that transition?
Well, several challenges that I've seen and experienced, and I come out of working in alcohol and drug treatment centers as a spiritual director prior to coming here to the church, and I still work with that community. What I've seen as some challenges in a veteran transitioning into civilian life is the veteran may not be fully or completely prepared for this major change that's about to occur. It is a big change, and they actually, the transition from military life, my experience from going from the military to the police and the police to ministry, there's a death of sorts that occurs because you're leaving behind this lifestyle, this community that It was a matter of life and death every day you went to work. You depended upon your buddy to your left or right to take care of you and to make sure that you came home at night. And so this is a huge change because now you feel alone. And that's a big challenge. Isolation is a big challenge. Not having the support structure, that whole entity or system that's in place that you're a part of, for instance, the military unit, the combat unit, or that patrol that you're a member of at the police department, that your shift is what we called it here in Austin. You don't have that group of men and women that you can turn to every day. And sometimes these people aren't there to answer your phone call. Sometimes these men and women don't know where to look for jobs to help you out. And so that's a big challenge, the feeling alone, the isolation. The next challenge I see is that in trying to cope with the change and the isolation and the feelings of loneliness, the veterans will tend to turn towards drinking to numb the feelings, to numb that fear of transition, preparing for that major change. In not knowing how to do that, they'll begin to abuse alcohol. They may even struggle with not an addiction, but maybe a dependency on pain medications if they've been injured in a combat environment. And so now that pill or that drink becomes their buddy on their left or their right. And what that begins to do is it creates a barrier for them to accept the new consequences of this new life that they're having to experience. And when I say consequences, it's not a negative term. However, there are positive and negative consequences that become challenges for the veteran as they face transitioning from military life into civilian life. The consequences that we'll begin to explore here in a matter of minutes. That's a challenge. And the final challenge is they come back and they can have the physical disability that they're having to cope with. They may not be able to do things that they had been able to do in the past. They may not be as strong or as fast as they had been in the past. And so there's a grief process that they're going through now. And are they willing to go through the grief process? Are they willing to allow themselves to get angry, to bargain, to feel and experience the depression, get help for that, and then finally come to a place where they can accept their new physical or maybe even emotional or psychological and spiritual even, these new changes that have happened. Those are challenges as well. And it's whether or not the veteran wishes to face those challenges that really impacts their transition into civilian life from the military life.
Oh, those are great points. One other thing that I've had brought up to me by a couple of veterans, which has been a bit of a struggle for them, although I think it's probably a much lesser struggle than some of the things you mentioned, but is that when they were in the military, they could sort of look at someone's uniform and they could look at the stripes or the symbols on the uniform and they could know how to interact with that person and they could know that person's level and their rank and that kind of thing. And as a civilian, they look at the people on the street and they have no way to gauge, who is this person? Are they important? How should I interact with them? And that was one of the things that was also brought up to me. I don't know if that's something that you've seen with any of the people that you've worked with.
Yes, that definitely makes sense. And that's an appropriate challenge that you bring up. And one thing that I have spoke with veterans about is their ability to trust others. And when this person who they're sitting in an interview with, who's a civilian, is not wearing that uniform, however, they may have the degree or the pedigree on their resume, yet the veteran cannot see or know what their degree is necessarily or what their resume looks like. A person not wearing this uniform, it may create trust issues with the veteran because veterans in the military, they are trained to be in control of their environment. They're trained to be in control of themselves. And when we get out into the civilian world, we have to accept the reality that we are no longer in control of other people. To be in control of others and to force them or try to get them to share information with us, that's not necessarily a positive or productive approach in interacting with civilians in this new life. And so, yes, when these individuals do not have the uniform on, when they do not have the rank, when they do not have the medals on their chest, when we do not know what their background is, that can create an angst, that can create another challenge.
Gosh, I could really see that. That makes a lot of sense. Well, I know that as veterans come out of the military, it seems like sometimes they also have misconceptions about what it might be like to transition back into the civilian world. Are there certain misconceptions that you see that may be patterns that you've seen more than one time?
Yes, some of the misconceptions that I've seen are veterans, they have a misconception that they've been trained in one particular field, or maybe they have a dual MOS or military occupational specialty, and the misconception that they have is that that is the only thing that they would be able to do or know how to do in civilian life. So that in a sense, they're already coming out of the chute pigeonholing themselves. And one of the things that I did, because I only had a background in infantry reconnaissance with the military, and then of course as a police officer, I had a lot of weapons training, and I really did not know what to put on my resume. I felt the only jobs that I could go into were being a security guard, or being a bodyguard, or maybe being a professional limousine driver. I knew no other areas to go into, and as a matter of fact, I was told, it was recommended to me that I meet with a career coach here in Austin, Texas. And the next misconception I had was, well, this career coach, who was a woman, she doesn't know what I've been through. She doesn't know what my experiences are. How could she possibly help me?
Oh, that's interesting.
And yet I was completely ignorant to the world of career coaching. I didn't understand the tools that you use in your profession to help those of us who are transitioning. And so I had to get beyond the misconception that you had no idea how to help me, and that I actually had skills and traits from the military and from the police department that were very beneficial in other lines of work that I never imagined myself potentially going into, such as becoming a coach or a teacher, or even going into ministry, which is something I never anticipated doing. It's something that I'd never wished for, yet I had to move through those major misconceptions of pigeonholing myself and not trusting a career coach to finally get to where I am today.
Oh, that makes so much sense. So between the military and the police, was it over 15 years that you were in those together? I'm trying to remember.
That's right. I served 8 years in the military and 8 years in the police department. So I was in those service positions for 16 years.
So I could see how it would be easy to pigeonhole yourself, and I could see how other people might do that too, because if you spent 10, 15, 20 years in a certain role, it makes a lot of sense that that would be how you identify yourself, really.
Yes.
That's really helpful. Are there any other misconceptions that you wanted to cover, or did that cover most of them that you were thinking of?
Well, some of the other misconceptions is veterans, from my experience of who I've worked with and in the environments where I've worked with veterans, and these are veterans who I've worked with quite a few from Fort Hood up in the Waco, Belton area, just north of Austin, and also Fort Sam Houston down in San Antonio. And again, this could be related or tied into the pigeonholing, but surprisingly, they sell themselves short. And without that structure, they don't feel that there's a lot of opportunity out there for them. And the communities are working so hard to provide opportunities for veterans to become employable after their military career comes to an end. And so, the biggest misconception is you are worth more than you think you are, that there are so many talents and skills that you have that you may or may not realize from your experience in the military that a lot of employers actually want desperately. And so, that is probably the only other one I can think of right now.
Sure. The one that I have also seen with some of the veterans I've spoken with is that they really expected that the process to transition into the civilian world would be easy. They thought it would not be a painful process, and they were surprised at how much sort of personal reflection and personal work that they had to end up doing. They just thought it would be smooth and that they would be paid well and they would be put into an important position that was a similar level as to what they were in the military. And the whole process was just incredibly painful, incredibly hurtful. And like you said, they feel very isolated. That's what I've kind of seen.
That's so true because, again, and I look at things from a spiritual perspective. And when I say spiritual, I'm not speaking about religion. They're two totally different things, okay? From a spiritual perspective, the transition isn't seamless. It's not always easy in a lot of the cases because, again, like I said earlier, there's so much going on within the veteran's soul and conscious self, their inner self, that they may or may not realize. And what's happening is they're going through the process of grief. They're, again, this life and death thing. This death is occurring because they're leaving the military. This new life is beginning because they're beginning their civilian life. Life and death are not easy transitions. Think about loved ones who you've lost. Them dying, you being witness to them dying, is not an easy thing to be a part of. We get sad. We hurt. We may feel lonely because this death is occurring. And the same thing happens in job transitions. A mini death occurs. And so as this transition's occurring, the process, the literal process of doing the resumes, of picking up the phone and calling people who they need to network with, that the veteran needs to network with, as they're trying to do these things, there's also behind the scenes, behind the curtain, there's the grief that's happening. There's the change that's happening. There is a struggle of, am I able to accept this change in my life now? So that, at a spiritual level, really contributes to the process feeling hard. And it may literally become difficult for the veteran because if they're not aware of that grief that they're going through, it can become a barrier for them to successfully go to that job networking event. It can become a barrier for them to successfully go to that job interview and interview well, or maybe even get coaching on how to interview well, or prevent them from writing a good resume or going to the training on how to write a good resume, because even the act and the art of writing resumes have changed since I've gotten out of the military. It's a whole new world in how to write a resume. It's pretty interesting.
You know, even in the past 10 years, the way that you look for jobs has changed tremendously. And even people who have not been in the military struggle a lot, especially if they've been fully employed at a company for 10, 15 years. You know, they go through a bit of a similar struggle. For example, if they are laid off and they suddenly find themselves unemployed because they haven't had to look for a job on the internet, they haven't had to go out and actively network. It's definitely really confusing for a lot of people. Well, in terms of what would you recommend that veterans focus on? What should they try to get better at when they're transitioning into the civilian world? Like, what are the things that would help them?
The biggest thing that I would say veterans should focus on getting better at when they're transitioning into the civilian world is focus on trusting others. Focus on being able to trust this man or woman that someone recommends you go talk to, and accept the fact that, you know what, okay, this person probably didn't experience what I experienced in the military. They may not have served in Iraq or Afghanistan. They may not have been in a combat environment. However, they are here to help you. They want you to have the best transition possible into the best job or career possible for you at that time. And so learning to trust, accepting this person into your inner circle or your network of support, that's really key. Focus on your ability to trust others. Focus on your ability to accept this person into your new support network. Also, I would recommend veterans focus on learning how to create structure in their daily living, because they no longer have someone doing that for them. They no longer have the military institution doing that for them. So it's important for the veteran to sit down with a mentor or a coach or their local faith leader if they're connected in to either a temple or a mosque or a church or wherever they get their spiritual needs met, to meet with that person to help them go through that process of creating structure in their daily living. So having a structured life can really help the veteran stay focused on the end goal, which is getting that career, getting that job, which will now create financial stability in their life, which is a huge thing in helping the veteran transition. And the third and final thing that I would recommend veterans focus on is their spiritual health. I always tell people we are not all religious beings, but we are all spiritual beings having a human experience. And there's a group that I'm a member of called the Soul Repair Project, and this is based out of Fort Worth, Texas, and we help veterans recover from moral injury after war. And whether you were in combat or not, you probably have some questions of your own morality, or you have wounds of the soul that you're trying to deal with. And so focusing on being the most healthy person that you can be physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, that will help your transition into the civilian world as well, in focusing on your own health and getting help for yourself. I always tell people I go to therapy on a consistent basis, and one of the things that I told my wife when I first met her, she's a marriage and family therapist here in Austin, is that as a man, for me, I related therapy to being similar to an oil change for a car. It's great to go once a month at the least, because you're taking care of yourself. And it's amazing how much we want to take care of our car or how much we want to help other people, yet we don't take the time or the attention to really check in with ourselves and find out, okay, does my oil need to be changed? Do I need to go to therapy? Do I need to get a coach? Do I need to go talk to my spiritual mentor or a dear, close, trusted friend and share maybe some of the things that I'm having struggles with focusing on? Because there's so many different things that come up for each individual. No one individual is going to struggle focusing on the same issues. For some, it may be their daily living schedule. For others, it may be how do I write a good resume. For others, it may be their physical exercise regimen. Each individual veteran has their own struggles of what they need to focus on. And so it's up to us as a community to support them in that, but it's also up to the veteran to focus on getting better by reaching out and trusting and getting the help during their transition.
No, that totally makes sense. And when you describe reaching out for help with these different kinds of resources, I often compare it, when I speak to my clients, I compare it to like going to a personal trainer. I go to a personal trainer because it gives me structure, it gives me accountability, it makes sure I show up. I learn things from my trainer about nutrition and health that help me each day, and it kind of keeps me in check. And I think sometimes we think about reaching out for that help like it's like a weakness, but I think it's a great idea to you're setting aside time for you. And during the week, often we're so busy, we don't always have time to sit back and reflect. And having someone that's part of your team, I think, can be, a pretty helpful thing at the end of the day. Well, so I'm sure you've worked with a number of people who also had a positive transition, at least eventually. What are some of the characteristics that you've seen for those who transition well?
What I've seen that are positive characteristics, first and foremost, the veteran has to be willing to accept this big change in their life, willing to accept the positive as well as negative consequences of this new life. And so acceptance is huge. That's a huge factor and positive characteristic. Another positive characteristic that I've witnessed is the veteran being open-minded to experiencing and trying new things. And when you've been in a system where you've been told what you're going to do day in and day out, and you've been told this is how we do it here, leaving that, there's a vacuum that occurs. And so the veteran now, if they're accepting of the new situation and if they're open-minded to begin to try new things, let's try yoga, let's try meditation, let's try a career coach, let's try eating more healthy, let's try to not drink 6 beers every single night, but rather work on that resume or research career fields that you can fit well in. It's being open-minded to trying newer, healthier things that are it's a really positive benefit for the veteran. And finally, I would say willingness. Is the veteran willing to go out and meet that career coach? Is the veteran willing to go and ask for help? Is the veteran willing to meet new people that haven't been in the military? If a veteran's not willing to do those things, then the chance of success is greatly reduced. Because again, what happens is that they're living in a state of isolation. They're disconnected from a community that is really there to support and help them come back into this new life.
No, it's very helpful. I think also someone who is willing to maybe be accountable and just keep trying, not give up, seems to also be an important characteristic. Are there certain kinds of jobs in particular that you've seen that seem to fit well with a lot of veterans?
There are, and one of the things that just came up for me, just kind of going back to the positive characteristics, I like to tell veterans that this is the how of it. This is how you transition well, HOW, and I know that veterans, we love acronyms. And so the how of it is this: you've got to be honest with yourself and others. Practicing honesty is huge. You've got to be open-minded, we've discussed that, and you've got to be willing. The HOW, how do you transition well? You've got to be honest with yourself and with others. You've got to be open-minded to new experiences and a new way of doing things. And you've got to be willing to listen to others who may not have been where you've been. They may not have served, but they've got your best interests at heart. So I just wanted to share that real quick.
No, that's great. That's really helpful.
With regards to jobs I've seen veterans transition into successfully, and of course, my personal experience, I served with a lot of veterans at the police department, but it seems like the emergency services jobs, police, fire, EMS, even medical profession, nursing, and the medical field in general, these are jobs where veterans do really well in, from my personal experience, because there is that structure. We wear the uniform in those jobs. And so you get into that job and immediately, whether you're in the medical profession or in the emergency services professions, you're wearing that uniform. Other jobs that I've seen veterans transition well into have been businesses and organizations such as FedEx and UPS. However, those are challenging to get into because they're competing also against the seasonal workers, the college students who are trying to get those jobs during the summertime, during the busy holiday seasons, which is when those companies tend to have their hiring spurts. But I have seen veterans transition well into those. And there are veterans who come out and they make great counselors, they make great therapists because they want to use the healing that they've gone through and their experiences to work with veterans as well. So those are just a handful of jobs that I've personally seen veterans transition into well.
Those are great examples. As you were talking, it made me think back on previously I worked at ServiceMaster, which owns a number of franchise companies, including Mary Maid's, ServiceMaster Clean, Furniture Medic, and Amerispec. And when I was there, they actually had a program to help former military members purchase franchises, and they would train them, and it's the small business that they own. Now, I never got the chance to really experience that and see how it played out with those new franchise owners, but I did find that really interesting that they had an entire program devoted to helping those members of the military to purchase the business and then to be trained on how to run that business. So anyway, that's just another possible idea. So I'm sure that some of our listeners today may be really struggling through some of these issues that we've been talking about. Are there certain resources? I mean, you've mentioned a few, but are there, like, for example, the Soul Repair Project, is that a nationwide program?
Yes.
Okay. Are there other programs or other types of resources that you would recommend someone who's struggling start to reach out to?
There are, and I know that veterans listening to this podcast, and maybe some others, are going to be quite shocked because this is the first time I said it, but the Veterans Administration is a place where they can reach out for help. And over the past 10 years or so, the Veterans Administration has gone through a lot of transition because they were very poor at providing assistance to veterans. We've recently received a new Veterans Administration clinic here in Austin. It's a beautiful facility. It's off of Metropolis Drive, and I have a couple of friends and colleagues who work over at that clinic, and I recently visited there, and there are so many resources available to veterans, and even if they don't know if they qualify or not for those resources, the staff is just so great at welcoming a veteran in and providing whatever assistance they can to that veteran. And if anything, they know where to direct the veteran for more help if they're unable to help them. So I'd begin there with the VA clinic. Another area that I know we have here in Texas, it's called the Military Veteran Peer Network, or MVPN. And the MVPN, it's a statewide initiative, and it's a network of military vets who help with finding veterans appropriate resources to go, for instance, employment or social service needs, housing, clothing, bus passes, transportation, things like this, how to pay the electric bill. So you have this statewide network here in Texas, the MVPN, that assists with that. Now, I'm not versed on if that organization or something similar is existing in other states, but I do know that we have that here in Texas, and it would be worth a veteran reaching out and contacting the MVPN. Also, there are many support groups. I know here in Austin, support groups that are within the various religious faiths that are there to help the veterans as well. One of the things that I'm doing here at Central Christian Church, in conjunction with the Soul Repair Project, which you mentioned, Angela, is the congregation is getting trained on how to help veterans. And so these veterans know, I want you to know that there are churches, there are temples, there are mosques, there are spiritual communities, at least here in the Austin area, that are ready and willing to help you find resources within the community and through the religious facility itself to help you on your journey of transitioning. So, these are some places that I would recommend they reach out for help. And, it's just networking. It's networking, getting connected, being open and willing to do that work. It's so important.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you for kind of listing out those resources. I know that'll be very helpful for a lot of folks. We've covered a number of different things today. Is there any other piece of advice that you'd like to leave our listeners with, or have we pretty well covered everything?
The advice that I just want to leave the listeners with is, whether you're a veteran yourself or whether you're someone who's never served in the military, we all have this great opportunity in our society today to help one another. And we stand on this kind of the edge of this precipice where we have a choice to make. Are we going to step out of our comfort zone and go to an event and volunteer to help a veteran? Or are you going to be the veteran who you step out of your comfort zone and you learn to trust those who are meeting you to want to help you? So it's very relational. It's something that we as a community, not just as a local community, but as a national and maybe even a global community, we have this opportunity, after going through so much trials and tribulations and experiences, we have this opportunity to help one another become better human beings. And I really feel like that's what it's about, and that we all have a role to play, and that no thing that we do, however small or insignificant we think it is, everything that we do matters. Everything that we do makes a difference in the life of another person, whether they're a veteran or not. And so that is the challenge that I want to leave the listeners with, is, are you going to be willing to do something, however large or small, to make a positive impact in another person's life?
Oh, that's great. That's excellent advice and a great challenge for our listeners. Well, so if any of our listeners are interested to learn about Central Christian Church, where should they go? Do you have a website?
We do. And they can look me up on the website, and that's cccaustin.org. That's cccaustin.org. And my email is egates@cccaustin.org. And if they wish to contact me by phone, the office phone is area code 512-476-6941. I can also be found on LinkedIn under Eric Gates. And I'm more than willing to help anyone or even have further conversation or discussion with those who are interested.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being so open with our listeners today.
Thank you, Angela.
Well, Eric, thank you for coming on. This has been some excellent advice, and it's been great to see you.
You too. Thank you for this opportunity.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. Please tune in next week for another edition of the Copeland Coaching Podcast. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.